Okay, now we're going to work on page 32 in the packet. And we're going to be learning how to factor quadratic trinomials. Okay, now, before we look at a quadratic trinomial, I had two binomials and I FOILed them. Now notice when I FOIL a binomial times a binomial, I end up with 4 terms, right? Then usually I combine the two middle terms, and now I have a quadratic trinomial. A quadratic trinomial is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, to factor a quadratic trinomial, what we're going to do is we are going to learn how we have a trinomial and we can break this middle term down into 2 terms so that we can then factor by grouping. So this is how we're going to factor a trinomial, is by changing it to 4 terms by reversing the FOILing process and factor by grouping. Now, the way we're going to do this is we're going to use what's called the AC method. Now, it is called the AC method because you look at the coefficient of your square term, which is a, and the constant, which is c. And you try to find magic numbers. Now, you look for 2 numbers that, when multiplied, equal the product of a times c, but when added, equal b, which is the coefficient of the middle term. So, if we look at the example that I first showed you, x squared plus 10x plus 16, in this case, a is 1, and we're going to start out where a is always 1, but we're going to use the same procedure when a is not 1. So 1 times 16 is 16. So we're looking for 2 numbers that, when multiplied, equal 16, but when added, equal 10. Because we're looking for numbers when a times c multiplied to a times c, which is 16, but add up to b. Now, 2 numbers that, when multiplied, equal 16 would be 2 and 8, but when added, equal 10. So you go through your numbers and you come up with 2 and 8. So now that means, instead of writing 10x, I'm going to write 2x plus 8x. Because 2x plus 8x equals 10x. Now, I am going to factor this by factoring by grouping. So I group these 2 and I group these 2. So I get x plus 2, plus 8, x plus 2. And that becomes x plus 2 times x plus 8. And I have now factored my trinomial. And this is called the AC method. So, let's try it with the next one. So now the next one, number 2, is factor x squared minus 5x plus 6. So the AC method says 2 numbers that, when multiplied, equal 1 times 6, which is 6, but when added, equal negative 5. So let me just redo that. So, think of 2 numbers that, when multiplied, equal 6, but when added, equal negative 5. So now I know one's going to be positive and one's going to be, I know they're both going to be negative, because the only way to get a sum that's negative and a product that's positive is if I have the same signs. The only way to get a negative sum is if they're both negative. So it's going to be negative 2 and negative 3 equal negative 5, but negative 2 times negative 3 equals 6. So that means I'm going to break negative 5x into negative 2x minus 3x. So again, I have broken down my 3-term trinomial into 4 terms that I can factor by grouping. So this becomes x minus 2. I factor out negative 3, x minus 2, and I get x minus 2 times x minus 3. Okay? Now, we're going to continue to do this using the AC method, but when A is 1, you will notice that every time I end up with my magic numbers as the answer. It's x minus 2, x minus 3. That's not a coincidence, and it can be used as a shortcut. But we're going to do it the long way just to get used to doing it the long way, because when the coefficient of that first term is not 1, you have to use the AC method. And either way, you always find your magic numbers. So, the AC method tells me to use 1 times negative 10. So blank times blank equals negative 10. Blank plus blank equals 3. They equal AC but add up to B. So two numbers that multiply to equal negative 10 but add up to 3. Obviously, if it's a negative product, one's negative, one's positive. Obviously, the bigger one has to be positive because it adds up to a positive number. So it's going to be positive 5 and negative 2. So now I rewrite this using plus 5x minus 2x minus 10. So I've broken my trinomial into a 4-term polynomial that I can factor by grouping. Negative 2, x plus 5. This ends up being x plus 5 times x minus 2. Again, notice my magic numbers are my solution. Okay, so go ahead and try the next one on your own. Actually, try the next two. Stop the video, try the next two, and turn it back on, and I will do 4 and 5 for you. So number 4 is x squared plus 7x plus 12. I'm looking for two numbers that when multiplied equal 12, but when added equal 7. That would be a positive 3, a positive 4. So I already know my shortcut method would give me an answer of x plus 3 times x plus 4, but we're going to practice using the AC method. So I'm going to say x squared plus 3x plus 4x plus 12. I factor by grouping. I factor out an x, x plus 3. I factor out a 4, x plus 3. And I end up with x plus 3 times x plus 4. Okay. Now, if you haven't already done 5, stop the video and do 5. And number 5, x squared plus 9x plus 8. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 8 but add up to 9. And that's going to be 8 and 1. Don't know why that took me so long. Okay, so I'm going to break this to x squared plus 8x plus x plus 8. Factor by grouping. I get x, x plus 8. Take out a 1, x plus 8. And I'm left with x plus 1 times x plus 8, which are my magic numbers, so I could have done the shortcut at the beginning. Okay, so that's the end of this video.